Well, I'd just like to start by saying that how lopsided this whole environment, development, I mean, this is what it's stuck in right now. There's environment on the one hand, there's development on the other. And we're not seeing how the two should go together. And to start with, if you just look at the statistics, right now, because of this so-called growth that we're talking about, we lose 300 acres of forest every day to growth. So what growth is this? I mean, people turn around and, when all of us as environmentalists or environment journalists go out there, we're labeled as anti-national. And the only question I ask is our right to demand clean air, clean water, how does that make us anti-national? So I come from a space of a lot of anger right now at what my government is doing. And when I see people around who are not questioning this model of growth, that makes me very angry. So, as I said, 300 acres of forest diverted every day, a 95% clearance rate by the Environment Ministry, and even as we speak right now, it's taken the last 50 years to develop a body of environment laws. As we speak right now, this government is working on dismantling that body of laws. I see environment laws or the whole regulation system as, I see that as a, what is the role which a traffic cop plays. He's regulating traffic, he's making sure there are no accidents. That's how I see environment laws. I don't see them as, as inhibiting growth. I see them as regulating growth, making sure there are no accidents, making sure our air remains clean, that we have these green spaces, and most importantly, our biodiversity is protected. Yes, so we've had a couple of incidents in recent times which we are not linking whether to climate change or to human-induced disasters. And I'll give the example of outside Bombay, we had this incident of this massive landslide which took place. Now you can just call it as a one-off. People died in that landslide. What was the cause? Deforestation. You look at what happened in Uttarakhand. Now you can say it was heavy rainfall and that just people got washed away. I was there on the banks of the Ganga. I was following the river Ganga for almost 6-8 months for a TV documentary I was working on just a year before the disaster happened. Every single person who lives in the upper stretches of the Himalayas had predicted this would happen. Why? Because there has been again large-scale deforestation for the 600 dams which are coming up on the tributaries of the Ganga. A cascade of dams as you move from the source down to Rishikesh. 600 dams. So I am not saying let's not have electricity, let's not have dams. But how many can an ecosystem take? That's what we need to start questioning. So as environmentalists, we are not opposing growth. What we're opposing is growth without any boundaries. Well, we don't calculate. I think that is the problem. And as I've always said that we need to move from GDP to GEP, which is from gross domestic product to gross environment product. And I feel that we can actually calculate GEP in terms of how many rivers have we cleaned, how many farmers have we incentivized to move to organic farming, how many how many green spaces have we created, how many forests have we protected. We're not calculating all that. We're only looking at GDP centered growth. And yes, financially there is a problem, but look at the other side of it. When disasters happen, when the government goes out, there's a cyclone hitting the coast of Gujarat and thousands of people have to be evacuated. Do we not look at economic cost then? The cost which the government has to put into saving lives, which is very important. So I think we need to build that into our financial systems as well. Exactly. So if you did preventive measures, now we're looking at, whether it's adaptation or mitigation as far as climate change is concerned. If we're looking at the concept of climate change, I would say if we take those preventive measures before, if we change our concept of growth, if we build in low carbon growth into our systems and not just as something we do on the side. For instance, we look at renewables as, oh, we must develop it for poor people. But we don't look at how our cities are energy guzzlers. We don't look at designing our malls differently. We don't look at how we need to use less cement. So all this contributes. And that's why we have even concepts like heat islands in the city where, you've built up so much in your cities that is what is contributing to, even local temperatures going up. Yes, and if you question that faith, then as I said, you get labeled as being anti-India or anti-development. So it's seen as regressive. But we are not asking people to go and live in caves. Our honorable power minister, he recently made a statement saying that there are either people who want to live in caves or people who want to get out of those caves. So this is how we see environmentalism as. We don't see it in our everyday lives as a philosophy we need to embrace. We just see it as, okay, let's shut the tap when we're brushing our teeth. That's not environmentalism, and that's certainly not degrowth. I think degrowth is another concept which is now, the West is now beginning to talk about it. We seem to look towards the West for everything. I mean, India had a philosophy of degrowth many years ago. I don't know where along the way we abandoned it. So, right. So, I mean, here, there's that environment Kuznets curve, which I've spoken about in my book as well, which says that let's pollute all we can, and then we can look at issues like cleaning our rivers and giving money for tigers. But everyone questions this concept now. It's now well known that there is no such thing as let's develop and then we will take care of the environment. We have the example of China. We have the example of the West, where, and specifically I'll say in terms of as a biodiversity person, you lose species along the way. You cannot bring back those species. If you look at Europe, you look at the US, they've lost a lot of their wildlife. They are now trying to get that back. The US is now decommissioning dams. We are still thinking of more and more dams. And I'd like to say that I am not sure if this is about economics. I think it's more, well, economics, yes, but it's linked to politics. And if someone asked me that, okay, so if we don't want big dams, why don't we build smaller dams? I said, because there's more money in the big dams. Yes, so exactly. So we've now cleared, the Ministry of Environment and Forests has cleared over 150 thermal power plants which are to come up. So these thermal power plants for the next 30 years will require that much coal to fire them. So what we've done is we've locked ourselves into that model of growth. And I understand that, renewables is expensive, but are we looking at making renewables cheaper? And it's a kind of chicken and egg situation. Until we invest in renewables, until we get the technology to make it cheaper, it's not going to be cheaper. But it has to, for the government, it has to become a priority. I feel we don't question our government enough about environmental issues. We don't see it as affecting all of us. So I think the failure lies in people, not just the government. Exactly. I mean, at your book launch, and I found there was a lot of uneasiness in the audience that what is he saying, what is he talking about? So there was how can he question growth? How can he question, the fact that we need to have cities, we need to have energy, so no one is saying no to electricity, for instance. But as I keep saying, are those thermal power plants being used to sustain the lifestyles of the rich in our cities, or are they being used to actually provide energy to the poor? I think it's the former, and that's where the problem is. Well, I think we need to change the concept of growth. I think the problem is the growth as we define it. I mean, if we're defining growth in terms of how many power plants are you setting up, how many smart cities are you creating, and how many multinationals have you invited into the country to do Make in India sort of campaigns, then no, it's not possible without exploiting the environment. But if we change our concept of growth, if we change our definition of growth, if we make it more palpable for the people who live with the resources, then I think yes, that is possible. I think that is possible. And I'll tell you right now, I see a war going on in the country right now. There's a battle for natural resources. And I've seen that in my time as an environment journalist. I have traveled to Niyamgiri, where a handful of tribals have fought one multinational company which is based on the London Stock Exchange, simply because, well, yes, it was about faith, because of their faith that they believed that their mountain was sacred and it cannot be exploited for bauxite. When you look at Goa, you look at Chhattisgarh, you look at Jharkhand. I give the example of these states to the people who say, okay, we need these minerals to develop. And the only thing I say to them is, if this is development, then how come Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Bihar are your most backward states? If mining really brought development to an area, then how come these are your most mineral rich states are your most backward states in the country right now? I think this is the fundamental question which the growth walas or the development walas need to answer. I mean, look at our lives in the cities. I mean, I have a 6-month-old baby who has already showing signs of a respiratory problem. 1 in every 4 children in Delhi right now has problems of asthma. So, I mean, we see it everywhere, whether it's in our health. Right over here on the edge of Delhi is a place called Greater Noida, where they're saying because of the water contamination, it's labelled as critically polluted by the Government of India. They have an index. So it's recognized as a critically polluted area. The incidence of cancer have gone up exponentially in the last 5 years, just in those few villages in Greater Noida. So of course all this is going to have its impact, and the first way for it to have its impact is on our health systems. So that's what I say, this is cosmetic. What we don't know about the West, and maybe Sunita Narayan would have given you that example, the per capita emissions of someone living in the US is 20 tons, whereas of an Indian is 1.7 tons per person. So I think we don't need to look at just how clean the roads are, but look at emissions, and let's not forget the US has outsourced its emissions to countries like China and India, and that's why we have Prime Minister Modi saying come and make in India. Prime Minister Modi seems to forget that what will be the carbon impact of all these industries coming into India, exploiting our resources. Are they going to be answerable again in terms of the environment laws? No, because we're going and diluting those as well. Let's put it another way. I think the balance of power is so lopsided, and I'll give you just a visual example that if you go to something called the National Green Tribunal, you will have one lawyer sitting on the right hand side fighting for environment. There will be a battery of 45 lawyers on the other side representing mining industry interests. This is how the balance of power is right now, and to me that image says it all. This is what we're up against. China is now actually saying we need to clean up our air. I still feel in India we're still laid back about this. We're still thinking somewhere we're going to get access to those energy sources. It'll come from somewhere. We'll get it from the Arctic or we'll get it from somewhere. I'm not sure if we've woken up to that crisis yet. Yes, it is difficult to sustain that model of growth, I agree. But has our government and our people realized that? I'm not too sure about that. Yes, I think the West, of course, has realized that their sources of energy are shrinking, which is why, as I said, they're outsourcing it to the developing world. And I think the developing world countries like Brazil or whether it's China, they are waking up to it, but everyone just wants to do what the West was doing 20-30 years ago. So I think that's where the problem is, and a lot of this will, I think, get resolved in the Paris summit, which will be in 2015. I think a lot of this geopolitics will be on a collision course at that time. I think they get it, they choose to ignore it. I think we want to live in the moment, so we choose to ignore it because there's more money to be made in this model of growth right now. As I said, I don't think our policymakers get it. No, I'm very pessimistic. I don't think they get it. I think the individual on his or her day-to-day level gets it. But I don't think our policymakers or the West or the developed world, I think they choose to ignore it. I don't know, it sounds like a very snobbish thing to say that they don't get it. It's not like we are some enlightened souls and we get it and they don't get it. I think we haven't created the options. Like every time I go and make a presentation about looking at the concept of degrowth or looking at being less dependent on oil or low carbon growth, there are not enough successful examples, and that's, I think, what we need to show to the world a little bit more, that it is possible to have another kind of growth which is gentler on the planet. So I think that we need to demonstrate more. Exactly, yeah, I think that's a great analogy. I mean, we have the cancer of growth all around us, and of course it's making our systems decay in every way possible. But I'm not too sure if we are willing to change, and it worries me because I'm not so optimistic. I think they'll reach a point where they'll have to change, but I don't know if they will change willingly. I think we're headed for that collision course, and I mean it's not somewhere far off. We're seeing it every day as we talk right now. New York is snowed in, so it's not just affecting us, the developing world. It's also affecting. I mean, if you look at again, there's a map which shows the number of cyclones which have hit the U.S. coast in the last 5 to 10 years. The intensity and the frequency has gone up. So we're living that nightmare right now. Yeah, guilt doesn't work well to change people. But it's something which I had learnt, which was that how do you change people? How do you make behavioral changes? And they spoke about this theory called SLEs, significant life experiences. So what they found was that people as children, when they had been exposed to positive behavior or positive environment friendly behavior, were more likely to make those changes in their lives because they had been exposed to that, and it caused, as they say, significant life experiences in their memory space. I still feel it's the emotional connect to nature which will ultimately make people change. E.O. Wilson spoke about biophilia. The love of nature is innate in all of us, and I hope that is what will make people change. I don't think any economic policy or any politician or any Modi or any UPA or Congress or the West, the India, I don't think all that is going to change us. Ultimately, it's our love for open skies, green spaces, that is what is going to make us change. I mean, if we're talking about the next generation, we keep saying we need to, in environmentalism, we keep saying we need to think of our, the future generations, and I think that's where the change will lie. It lies really in what kind of a world, I'm sorry to be using a cliche, but what kind of a world we leave for them. And if we provide them with those significant life experiences in their childhood, I think they will, as grown-ups, as CEOs, as those corporates or politicians, say, maybe we need to think of growth in a different way. India's feeling it already. But as with everything else, we say, okay, we live with this as well. We live with corruption, we live with disease, we live with a lot of things. As Indians, we're very tolerant of a lot of, a lot of things which go wrong around us. We live with that. So we're living with it already. We're living with cyclones every week. In the last 3 weeks, we've had 2 instances of cyclones. We're living with it. That's the sad story. Yes, as I said, yeah, that can be a strong point, but I still feel that we need to have more demonstrable models of what works, and I think we're missing on that. I mean, we need to have, as people who, and I keep saying environmentalists, but as just people who want a different concept of growth, we need to go out there and show the world this is what works. I wish we had more of that, and I've started doing that in my conversations as I move around. Even when I make presentations, I always keep 5 slides of examples of what I think is a Swachh India or a Clean India. These are examples. I mean, I'll give you examples of this company in Bangalore called the Daily Dump, which trains every household to do composting. These are such simple things, but they've kept 14,000 kilograms of food waste out from our garbage landfills just through the simple effort in the city of Bangalore. Or we have Huss Power, this gentleman in Bihar. He generates energy from wheat chaff. So it's a waste which you find in every village, but he's organized villages and they have access to that power because of Huss Power. So these kind of models, we need that, and we need that not just for the poor, we need it for us here in the cities who are the biggest consumers of resources. The cultural mindset has to change. The culture of growth has to change. It cannot be about going to conferences with these plastic bottles in front of us and these heavy intensity lights on top and talking about the environment. That needs to change. It makes me I cringe when I go to all these conferences where everyone's talking about the environment and they're sitting in these air-conditioned rooms with all these lights, and it bothers me. There's too much of business as usual.